Welcome to the Construction Disruption Podcast, where we uncover the future of design, building, and remodeling.
I'm Todd Miller of Visay Industries, manufacturer of specialty metal roofing and other building materials. Today, my co-host is the illustrious, the famous, the infamous Ryan Bell. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing well, Todd. How are you?
No, I'm doing well, too. I did have an interesting thing come up, so I had to go to the doctor this week. And so I'm in there with the doctor, and all of a sudden, the nurse kind of barges into the room and it's kind of surprised everybody. And the doctor looks at the nurse and says, do you need something? And she says, yes. She says, there's a man in the waiting room who thinks he's invisible. I don't know what to do about it. The doctor says, tell him I can't see him today.
Nice.
Okay.
That's a good one. I have one too, actually.
Cool.
What type of cereal goes to the gym twice a day?
I know what this is. Am I allowed
Yeah,
to
you
say?
should.
Shredded wheat.
Yep. Good old shredded wheat joke.
Oh, my goodness. Those are good. Okay. Well, just to let our audience know also, we are doing our challenge words once again, where each Ryan and myself and also our guest have a secret, sensitive word or phrase we are challenged to work into the conversation. And you, our audience, can be listening for peculiar things we might say, which could happen at any moment regardless. But at the end of the show, we will tell you whether we were successful working in our challenge words or not. So, Ryan, good to go?
Yes, let's get started.
Okay. So, just talking to our audience, just curious, as you experience life and you go into different communities or developments, I'm just kind of, do you ever wonder what goes into making that community or development be cohesive and assembled in a way that enhances the lives of those who live and work there? Well, we're going to dig into that today by taking a look at a thing called master planning. Our guest today is Joshua Sanabria of Go Architect and Engage. Based in Chicago, the specialty of Josh and his firm is helping both public and private organizations figure out how to make the most of their investments through good planning and design. Josh, welcome to Construction Disruption. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're looking forward to learning what your firm is doing and what this is all about. So I know, just doing a little bit of research, that you're a graduate of Andrews University in Michigan, which I got to confess I had not heard about before.
That's okay.
You have not heard of my college before, though, so I assure you that as well. So that's quite okay. But Josh has a bachelor's and a master's degree in architecture. So I'm kind of curious. I like to ask architects this. I'm kind of curious what drew you into this field. Is this something that hit you at a young age? You were the kid who was always drawing things around and rearranging the furniture, or is this something that hit you more as you approached adulthood?
Definitely a thing from childhood. Stereotypically, I had a ton of Legos, building blocks, things like that. I was very fortunate to be able to travel with my grandparents and things like that, and go to Europe and Asia and see ancient buildings and just kind of walk around beautiful places. I actually considered being a lawyer, but the moment that stands out is I was in Barnes and Noble, and I walked in the door and I immediately went towards the architecture book section. And as I was standing there, I thought to myself, why am I trying to do law school when I actually just like architecture? I should just do that as a field. And so I switched my major 1 year in.
Wow.
And was able to get into the 5-year package that Andrews University had, and did my master's and completed that in 2014.
That is very cool. So you're going in a completely different direction, just like, why don't I go where my passion is? I love that. Hey, I heard the other day that the gentleman who started, or at least kind of strongly developed Barnes & Noble, passed away. So we can remember him. He was in his 80s, and we got Barnes & Noble to thank him for. I don't remember his name. I don't think it was Barnes or Noble, as I recall. So, as I think about you and I look at what you're doing, I kind of think you would probably tell me that good design and good built environment, good neighborhood development, good community development is not an accident, but instead it's something that has to be approached as a process and with intentionality. Can you reflect a little bit on what that means to you?
Things are too expensive. They take too much time to build and plan and get approved. And you just don't come out of that situation with something that's of high quality unless you planned ahead. So, like you said earlier, I live in Chicago, one of the country's largest cities, one of the older cities that has had the opportunity to have a master plan and update that master plan literally over the last 100+ years. And you do see the fruit of that planning. For example, I live near Millennium Park, which has the Bean and a bunch of other kind of public amenities. All of those things came to pass because people were willing to plan ahead and plan decades ahead and put millions of dollars into it. So definitely does not happen by accident, definitely takes time. But when you think about economic benefits, civic, public health, all of those types of things, it's worth doing in the long run.
Very cool. A few years ago, my wife and our son and I were in Chicago and took an architectural tour, just us and a guide, and that was just fascinating. So I have to ask you. You mentioned it. Is the Bean reopened yet?
Yeah, the Bean is reopened. They
Okay.
opened it, I think, in June. They did some accessibility improvements with
Okay.
ramps and stuff like that, and I guess fixed some of the pavement. But yeah, it's all open now.
Cool. I wasn't sure about that. I'd read an article, I think must have been very early in the summer, and there were people who had gone to Chicago on vacation. They were bummed
Yeah.
because they were peeking in between cracks and fences in order to try to see it and take pictures
Yeah.
and things, but very neat. Well, tell us a little bit about the types of developments and projects that Go Architect that your firm works with.
Sure. So we actually work a lot with school districts who are trying to plan ahead for the next 10, 20 years of what buildings they need to repair, replace, or build from scratch. And this can be anything from handling new students, let's say a new suburb is being developed and you're expecting 500 new elementary kids. Well, 500 kids is a whole new school, basically. So, how do you plan ahead? How do you convince voters that you need the money to make this happen? All of those kinds of things need to happen years ahead of actually building anything, and especially years ahead of when students actually arrive. And then the flip side is also true. Some school districts are shrinking because housing is maybe too expensive in the zip codes that are part of that district. So, how do we resize the facilities, or what do we keep open or close, or things like that, which is not always an easy conversation. In fact, it's rarely an easy conversation. And so our firm specializes in that facility master planning process, some of the marketing and finance analysis, and a lot of the small parts that come together to form that pretty long-term plan.
So I'm curious, and this is completely off script for us, but I'm kind of curious. When you go into a school district and they're looking at this master plan, has there been a trend recently toward not having multi-site locations of public schools and trying to get them more centralized, or am I just imagining that? And perhaps it's just in some of the places I've been.
I have not noticed anything like that. I would
Okay,
say that it really depends on where the district is. For
sure.
example, here in Chicago, you have Chicago Public Schools, which is a very, very large district with literally thousands of structures that are part of the collection of facilities. So at this point, we're more into the replacing and maintaining discussion. If you are in the desert of California or Texas, where nobody lives there yet, Well, yeah, you're just going to build new facilities and you're going to spread them out in a
Mm-hmm.
logical pattern based off of estimated or forecasted development. So it's going to be a completely different strategy, completely different needs. Of course, weather, things like that. We don't really build schools here where people exit the classroom into the outdoors. But in California, that's pretty standard. Your classroom the door is the outdoors. So completely different in every case, every geography.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And, another thing as you were talking made me think. So, I live in a town of about 20,000. And a couple of years ago, it was announced that a Chinese company, automotive related to electric vehicles, was going to build a new plant in our town. They acquired I don't know, 1,200 acre site, something like that. And this plant was supposed to be up in a couple of years and employ 1,500 people, which, we're living in a community, an area that has very low unemployment already. And so I'm like,
Right.
where are these people going to come from? Where are they going to live? All that. But, then I did naturally think, how's the school district going to handle this? And I never did hear if they were really prepared for that. But the interesting thing was, this might interest you. So they bought this land. I can't believe they never did any core samples, but they started to do excavation and found that fairly shallow under the surface is a huge bed of gravel. And they eventually determined there was no way to fix that. And there's no way that they could
Interesting.
get the solid footing to build on top of. So the whole project is just stalled now for a couple of years. So, yeah, interesting. So, does Go Architect do full building design, or are you strictly focused on the planning and master development side of things?
Yeah, so we don't really do any what would you consider architecture
Mm-hmm.
construction documents or anything like that. I'm not a licensed architect in Illinois, so we wouldn't really even be pursuing those types of projects. And even on the master planning or urban design projects, we always come in with a collection of partners who does things like facility assessments and other
Okay.
aspects of the job. So we're never alone. And a huge part of the business, actually, of our business, is finding excellent partners to go in on these projects with.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit, pre-design, but as part of urban planning and urban design and campus design, you are designating where a building should be, how it connects to, other resources. You could even determine things like the square footage and the size or the capacity of that building. So you're planning ahead without necessarily saying, here are the columns, here are the doors, right? The style is still agnostic at that point,
Okay.
or the design is still agnostic. You more are just defining where it should go. And that's pretty common when it comes to urban design. It's pretty rare, even if we did some schematic, here it looks really cool, the chances of it looking exactly like that in 5 years when it's actually constructed, very low. So we can't
Gotcha.
get too attached to the actual designs too much.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So, I get this idea you're involved with other firms doing other disciplines. And, I suppose on some of these, let's take a huge school district. I mean, you're going to have more than one firm even working on the master plan, I would assume.
It's possible, yeah. It's possible. Actually, the very first one I worked on, it was split between 4 firms. There's a larger district, and we each kind of split it. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to that. Usually now we are, we'll say, the prime on it. It's not split between other firms. We are part of this, contractors or subcontractors are also part of it in that sense, but we're not necessarily splitting everything.
I'm kind of curious. I mean, what does that collaboration look like? Are you regularly getting with the other firms and meeting, or do you become more like a kingdom of wolves, all fighting for your own individual places, or what does that look like?
I think in our case, we don't really market ourselves as, let's say, competition to other architecture firms or to the other partners on these projects. we have to work in partnership because we're each involved in a different sector or a different part of the project. So for example, we do a lot of community engagement, which is what that software Engage is that you mentioned in the intro.
Okay.
So
right.
Engage is a survey software that we created to resolve some of the issues that we were facing with community engagement. So, that's an example of we were charged to resolve that issue. We have the software engineering expertise and energy and all that kind of stuff. So we resolve that. And then we can use that software for many other projects. So there's not much overlap. Everyone basically kind of adds some valuable item, and then we have to collaborate on the final deliverable, which is usually some digital website, digital platform that has things about, finances and money and staging out the progression of projects, things like that. So we usually work on that also, since we're more on the tech side a lot of the time.
Okay. So I'm curious, as far as your client's experience, how might they say that their experience differed or was better because of your firm being involved and because of the Engage program as well?
So we've now been involved with 22 master plans. So seems to be going well. People seem to be responding well to it. I would say the key difference is that in the end deliverable, we have spent a lot of time creating the most dynamic type of master plan. So in prior years, you might end up with a deliverable where it's a PDF and it's literally 200 or 300 pages and it just has all the information kind of dumped in one, but it is at the end of the day a static object. So we have programmed, invented all this kinds of stuff to make that final deliverable much more interactive. So now it's always an online platform where the facility managers or even the public can run different scenarios. They can see how much things will cost or might cost. They can view things like the community engagement results and survey results, and they can see what people wanted to prioritize. Of course, we can put in things like video and images, and the video can add a lot of context that really isn't possible with simply an image or text. So we just are able to add a lot more depth to the whole pitch, to the whole package, because that's also an important thing, is that you can go out and you can create a new plan for your downtown, of whatever size city you're in. But unless you get the voters to agree, or unless you get, the public-private partnership components to agree, all you did was draw some pretty pictures, right? It also is a marketing challenge to get everyone on the same page. And so our value proposition is that we help you make the best pitch possible for this vision, or even if it's just a requirement, we make the best pitch possible to help you do that. So that's why we operate in such a kind of defined niche. Hopefully it helps us do that service better.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I'm curious, it sounds like you're pulling a lot from surveys and needs analysis type things. Does your company actually run those, or are those run by outside firms and you just try to interpret and put the information to use?
No, a lot of the community engagement and surveying information, that's all gathered by us in some capacity. So whether that is an in-person meeting that, let's say, the client had, maybe with investors, or with, let's say, a school district, right? The school district may have a meeting with teachers or with parents, and then all that data comes to us, and we kind of figure out how it's prioritized. Or if it's us creating a survey, for example, using Engage and sending that to thousands of people, and that is automatically collected. So that community engagement portion is a pretty substantial part of what ends up in the final result and ends up in the prioritization studies and pitches, basically. Yeah, we're key to that.
I'm curious. I mean, I realize you guys don't do the actual design work and so forth, but does your final report ever include any recommendations? Hey, this seems to be a community that is very interested in this, or very contemporary, or this seems to be a very traditional community. Does your report ever include that to give a little bit of advice to the actual architecture and aesthetics?
Oh, definitely. So I'll be as detailed as I can. So let's say that you are renovating or changing your downtown, right? Maybe it's in the Rust Belt and you want to transform it into more of an area for tourism. So what might happen is, let's take a good aerial photo of your downtown, and we put it into Engage, and we do a open-ended sticky notes survey. So Engage can basically make these digital sticky notes where survey takers can click on the image and leave their note, right? So we create this survey and we send this to everyone that's part of your Chamber of Commerce. Let's say it's a few hundred or a few thousand people. And everyone is using that link to put their sticky notes on this site plan or photo of downtown. And since it's very qualitative data, right, it's very open-ended, you'll get comments like, oh, we need more parking, or there's nowhere to sit, or I wish there were more restaurants. Huge variety of comments, very open-ended, all over the place. Now, once some time has passed and we get enough, survey responses and etc., we can do a couple things. We can do a word cloud or use AI to create, like word associations or summaries. We could see where people placed the sticky notes on the image to say, oh, this part of downtown has a lot of positive comments, but this area has a lot of negative comments. Maybe we prioritize the project on this particular site or around this particular site. So once we have that very qualitative stuff, we usually would sit down with the Chamber of Commerce or whoever the client is, kind of look through it together just from a very high level, right? Now, of course, we have to figure out what's the budget, what's the capacity for the partners to make the changes. Obviously, you're not going to be tearing down every single building. You're not going to be, wiping it, from a clean slate, right? So you have to kind of be selective. Is it a matter of street design to maybe increase the likelihood that restaurants can do outdoor seating, which always creates a more lively event space kind of thing? Is it we find incentives to develop a certain number of plots that has been vacant for a long time? Or, is it something else entirely? Maybe it's you actually construct nothing, and our recommendation is actually you just incentivize street festivals, and you already have the good bones, but maybe you just need a little bit of programming. So there's all kinds of levels, right? Then stage 2 of community engagement. Now let's go back to Engage. Let's create a second survey, but this time, instead of it being qualitative, let's try to do quantitative. So let's say we've created a rendering of the new downtown and we've included, a new building on the vacant lot, wider walkways with space for outdoor restaurants, maybe decorative signing or lighting. Let's say we've done like 5 different, recommended projects. Using Engage, we can put what's called action dots. And essentially that's the image with a little dot over each of the projects that we're proposing. So it's almost like a sticky note in reverse, because now when a person responds to the survey, they click on the sticky notes or they click on the action dot and they can rate that project from 1 to 5 stars. So let's say I rate the vacant land as 5 and the wide walkways as 4. I don't really care about decorative lighting, so that's a 2, right? So now I have provided quantitative responses to each of the proposed changes. Now, what that does is it eliminates the struggle of most community development where the loudest voice always wins. But because we can send this quantitative survey to the entire town or the entire email list, we can average all of the scores. So if everyone is voting 1 to 5 stars on each of those 5 proposals, we can see where on average people's priorities are. So let's say it's, filled out by 500 people, and at the end, the vacant lot has an average score of 4.5, and the lighting is, 1.5, but the improved street walks and restaurants, that's a 5 out of 5. Like a whole town voted on that, right? So now we have the quantitative data to show to the PPP, the public-private partners, right? We can show them that, hey, most people voted that they want this. And we can even back that up, right? So as part of that survey, we can ask demographic questions. We can ask, do you live in a town? Maybe, do you have kids? Maybe, do you own property? Yes or no? Are you a rental? And so we can kind of stack all these questions together to gather more context. So, for example, let's say that only tourists voted for decorative lighting, right? Well, is that a priority or not? Or is it maybe that more of a blend of locals with families voted to increase sidewalk width? Now you have a really, really good case. You can take that and put that in a PowerPoint and hand it to the mayor, hand it to somebody, as a public figure, and they can say, hey, 75% of families with kids want us to do this to the streets. Boom, right? You've already helped them make a pretty dynamic, quantitative, data-driven choice. So what the actual widened street looks like will be handed to a civil engineer or somebody else down the road, right? And we know we'll need to find the, $1.5 million or whatever it is to take and do that. But at least we know what we're doing and we know who supports it. And this is just a very, very long kind of detailed example of what might happen at a project where you know very little, but at the end of 2-3 months, you can have a lot of information that supports any type of project that you want to do. Sometimes it's a surprise. Most times, most clients already kind of know, but at least now you have the numbers to support your arguments.
Has to be great information to be able to then bring to private developers, that company that may want to put a restaurant in or whatever. So no, I love the concept. So is Engage something that you have made available to other firms, or is it strictly proprietary to Go Architect?
No, anyone can use it.
Okay.
Engagebygo.com or engagebygo.com. It's open for anyone to use. Yeah.
So are there any folks, I could see it having uses for things outside of design and that sort of physical planning. I don't, I haven't been in, so I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it just seems like what you've developed could have some really far-flung applications as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it could be used for all kinds of stuff. We've used it for marketing. Okay. Where we ask an open-ended question. Could even be like, I don't know, what parts of this car design do you like or not, or do you like this outfit or that outfit? It really could be used for anything. And then you can, on your second question, you can say, ask for a person's email. So it could be an email capture, a lead generation tool. It really can be used for a lot of different stuff. We just obviously made it for our own challenges at first. So we've used it the most with that.
That's very cool. Very neat. So even aside from all this, you're also an author. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, just for fun mostly. Wrote a kids book a couple years ago based off of one of my friends, or at least at the time, was one of the youngest Black female architects in the United States. And so I was like, hey, we should, I'm gonna write a book. Can I make you one of the characters? And in the book, she has a son, and he's the main character. So yeah, just stuff like that. Photography, had some chances to travel to some unique places and take some photos and do a kind of photography travel book. Um, it's one of those things. Back in the day, I thought Go Architect would also be a publisher. So, books are very hard. You have to sell tens of thousands of copies to make any money with books. So quickly moved past that, but still an interest of mine.
Very cool. You're a real Renaissance man. So I'm curious, what is a key lesson or two that you have learned as a leader, a manager, a visionary when it comes to leading organizations, doing a startup? What are, just one or two key lessons maybe you've learned?
I think you always have to be curious. I think that's number one. Always curious, keep your eyes open, listen. We deal with organizations that, not, typically think of a civic government or a school district as huge sources of innovation. But, there are all of these components that are just under the surface. And, if you just brush off a little bit, right, you'll notice all kinds of opportunities and all kind of business opportunities. So I think you only notice that if you're curious. I think too, you have to give it some time. Like, we started in 2018. I was very fortunate to have some of the previous people that I used to work for came on as my clients. So it was not, when I started, we weren't necessarily at zero, but it took a long time. It took, 2 to 3 years to really get going and get the engines going and build up a list of projects and make the website look better than just like the one project that we had completed, So you really do need investors in a way. They don't always have to be financial investors. They can be a client, a previous boss that becomes a client. It could be a spouse that helps support you or your family while you build that business. And maybe, you're a single income household or something, or family member. And I think that's a huge barrier for a lot of people. It's like, it really does take 2 to 3 years to really figure stuff out most of the time. And even then, that's not a guarantee. You may not figure it out even after 2 or 3 years. So patience is a huge part of it. And having good partners or good investors is another part of it.
Oh, that's good stuff. I'm kind of curious. So we're always kind of trying to look at the future of design and construction and all that. But any particular trends that you're seeing out there right now, maybe in terms of master planning or, maybe in terms of design even, that it would be good for our listeners to have on their radar screen?
I think in a way, the only trend that I see as obvious is that people expect more. Let's say you go back to, let's say you go way back to post World War II, and the focus was just on building houses, responding to, men coming back from Europe, of course, the baby boom, and there was a severe shortage of housing. And of course, there were so like way more than we can fit into this podcast right now, of social issues, of housing policies unfairly discriminating. So there was just so much to be done, and some decisions were not being made properly. And so now here we are, 70, 80 years later, and people really do expect a lot more. They expect their downtowns to be accessible, to be friendly, to be economically self-supporting, or even beyond self-supporting. They expect it to add to the place. And that, I think, is a relatively, of course, let's say 30, 40 year development where people know generally what a nice place looks like or feels like. We see enough things on Instagram to know what beautiful spaces, or at least what people perceive as beautiful spaces. So I think in general, there's a higher level quality of care. There's a higher level of professional care. Of course, the requirements around community engagement have dramatically changed. You don't have to go far back to, there's a pretty famous figure in New York City, housing development, Robert Moses, where he just like built stuff randomly, with real no community engagement. And there was, of course, backlash to that. It's expected. It's sometimes legally required or contractually required. So I think the trend is only going to increase where people expect more. And you have to be dynamic in how you respond to that. You have to back up what you do with data, qualitative and quantitative data, because each have their own value. So I guess my piece of advice would be to make sure that you're actually improving. You're not living in the past.
I think that's really interesting, because one of the things that I often talk to our team here in manufacturing is, I think the trend is consumers are, there suddenly a couple of years ago, this word called bespoke started, going around. Everything was custom, and, typically manufacturers don't think that way. But I think the reality is consumers are going to start to expect it. And, someone's going to jump the shark, and someone's got to start to do that bespoke thing. And suddenly everyone's going to have to, because everyone will expect it. So that's a good advice there. I love it. Well, this has been a great time talking to you, Josh. Very interesting. So we're close to wrapping up what we call the business end of things. Is there anything we haven't covered yet today that you wanted to be sure to share with our audience?
No, it's been nice to talk about things. And I guess, parting piece is that Engage is free to use. So I'm always curious to see how people use it. They can go to the website and check it out.
Remind me of the website again.
EngageByGo.com. So EngageByGo.com.
I have not checked it out yet, I'm sorry to say, but I will now. Very, very fascinating. So before we close out, we have a little something we like to do called our rapid fire questions. These are 7 questions. You up to the challenge of rapid fire?
Let's do it.
Okay. Ryan, let's alternate. You want to ask the first one?
I would love to. Question number 1. What is a product or service you've recently acquired that was kind of a real game changer for you? And you can't say Engage on this one.
That'd be cheating. Yeah. Huge shout out to my project management software. So it's a very small company. It's called Sunsama, Sunsama. So it's a kind of task list, but it's based off of days instead of just like projects. And it's it's like a calendar and task list combined. Anyway, I found it and I loved it. Small team, like 2-person team, not a famous software by any means, but very useful.
Very cool. Sunsama. Yeah, I'm going to check that out.
Me too.
Question number 2. At the end of your days, what would you like to be remembered for?
At the end.
Way down the road.
Yeah, way down the road. I think both in my profession, but also just in personal life, I really do like to improve communities. So I'm part of a church community here in Chicago. I volunteer at an art nonprofit. I even am part of a rollerblading, group that goes around on Friday afternoons and rollerblades in the city. Of course, my work is basically mostly about communities. So I would hope in some capacity I'm remembered as somebody who brought value to the communities that I was part of.
Beautiful. Love it.
We didn't make you miss your Friday afternoon rollerblading, did we?
No, I mean, it's only 1:00.
Oh, okay. All right. It's a little later. Okay, good. Question number 3. What is your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve right now is the abundance of random and not that useful AI tools. I feel like I go onto all these tech websites and it's always, oh, I made this AI tool to do, XYZ thing. And I look at it, I'm like, well, why? Like, did anyone really need this? So I think it's a very general AI annoyance that I'm facing at this exact moment.
That is good. Although I was afraid you were going to say that your biggest pet peeve was random and not that useful podcasts that are out there. But so I was glad we did end up there.
I discovered earlier today on my lunch, I was scrolling through Instagram while I was eating, that I have a pet peeve of people touching their computer screens.
Oh.
And I don't think I've ever realized it before, but this guy was pointing something out and he was poking his screen and it just drove me nuts.
When it's not a touch screen?
Like drove me nuts. Yes. Yes.
So right, honestly, Ryan, did that drive you nuts, or the potential for fingerprints being left on it?
It's because of the fingerprints that get left on it.
I know
absolutely.
You too well.
Absolutely.
I like it.
Next question. What is a cause that you're passionate about?
Well, I volunteer at a art nonprofit here in town called Epic Art House. So we have free classes for kids. We have pottery classes, drawing, block printing, all kinds of stuff. So I teach a couple classes. I volunteer to help find new teachers, things like that. So yeah, Epic Art House in Chicago is something I'm involved with a lot.
You're giving me all kinds of things I got to look up now.
Okay, next question. And maybe you've already crossed this off, but what is your bucket list vacation? You still have one?
Oh, bucket list vacation. I'm very fortunate. My wife and I get to travel a lot. We just got back from Iceland 5 days ago. Iceland's definitely should be on everyone's bucket list. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. Cold, unsurprisingly, but there's waterfalls everywhere and sheep and just wilderness and glaciers. So definitely top 5. Maybe it's a little bit, well, it's maybe not stereotypical, but it's literally ancient. I have still not gone to Egypt, and I really would like to sail down the Nile and do that whole thing. So I guess Egypt is my next one. Very
cool. If you could time travel to any period in time, what time period would you choose?
Probably somewhere ancient Roman Empire, somewhere in there. There's so many influences that the Romans and Greeks had on almost everything. Our governments are certainly architecture, design, urban planning, social items, sports. I mean, you name it. So it'd be fun to kind of go back and see if it's anything like we have imagined in movies or just in my own mind.
Very good.
Final question. What is your favorite book or a book that you've read recently that you really enjoyed?
So actually, one of my favorite books, which I kind of disagree with on a fundamental level, but it still is one of my favorites, is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So the premise of the book, of course, is that, the underlying theme is that all life is kind of random and a little bit meaningless. And the author was Douglas Adams. He was kind of, I would go beyond atheist. He was more, I don't know the term for it, but basically he was like, everything in life is kind of random and meaningless, so we should just, enjoy it. And people travel through the universe in this book and they discover, right? And the stereotype or the kind of famous part is that the answer to life is 42. And it's like, well, does that mean? And then farther down the series, they discover it's just 6 times 7. So it's like, it has no actual deeper meaning. So I read this book. It's hilarious. But then it also, ironically, I came out of that book with the opposite perspective. I was like, wait a minute, everything is meaningful. Like, so the book had the complete opposite effect on me as maybe the author intended. So I would put that out there as one of the more impactful books in my life.
Very cool. Very neat. I had to read that in college, and it was just
probably as a psychology or philosophy class.
Yeah, it was just an assignment to me, unfortunately.
It's an absurd book when you read it, but underline these themes.
Well, this has been great. Thank you again, Josh, for joining us. For folks who want to get in touch with you or learn more about Go Architect or Engage, remind us again some ways they can do that.
Sure. So they can go to engagebygo.com. So engagebygo.com if they want to sign up and use Engage for free. If they're interested more on the urban planning and design side, goarchitect.com.
Very good. And we will put those in the show notes as well. So we have to recap our challenge words. Ryan, you worked yours in right off the bat.
I did. I wasn't sure there was any way I was going to get it in if it wasn't right at the beginning with the joke. So shredded wheat was my phrase, but you used it first, but then I repeated it. So I think that counts.
I know. Well, it was funny when I heard the setup. I'm thinking, oh gosh, now I don't remember if that was your word or my word. So I thought, is he being nice to me? I wasn't sure what I should do. My phrase, which Ryan had thrown out there, Josh had thrown out there, I apologize, was Kingdom of Wolves. I kind of worked it in a little bit weird way, but oh gosh, Josh, you didn't get yours in, is that?
I didn't. Mine was Run, Forrest, Run. I really was trying to think about everything with Forrest Gump. I couldn't figure out how to get the word run in there. I almost said Forrest 5 times, but then I was like, it's not going to count.
Oh, good time. Well, thank you. Well, thank you again. This has been I've really enjoyed this. Good time.
Yeah, thank you both. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you to our audience for tuning into this very special episode of Construction Disruption with Joshua Sanabria of Go Architect and Engage. Check out what he's doing. Great work. Please watch for future episodes of our podcast. We always have great guests. Don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or thumbs up on YouTube. Until the next time we're together, though, keep on disrupting and challenging folks. Keep on looking for better ways of doing things. And by all means, have a positive impact on everyone you encounter. Make them smile, encourage them. Simple things we can do that really do change the world. So God bless and take care. This is Isaiah Industries signing off until the next episode of Construction Disruption.
This podcast is produced by Isaiah Industries, manufacturer of specialty metal roofing and other building products.